It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and I'm back. And, of course, I'm here with Andy Grabner. And, Andy, thank you so much for filling in for me last recording, because I sure missed a good one. How are you doing, Andy?
Yeah, good. I gotta say, right, we have I think a challenge now because I know you had a good reason for skipping the last recording.
Yeah.
But I am skipping the first half of most likely our most important soccer match in Austrian history because we may make it to the next round of the Euro Cup.
Yes.
But I think it's worth sticking here with you guys and talking about something that is obviously dear to both of our hearts.
But the difference is, though, is that I could have lost my job for skipping my work to do the podcast, whereas there's only social consequences for you.
Yeah, maybe Austria takes my citizenship away if they.
But didn't they lose the last game? Didn't they lose the last game that you watched?
Yeah.
So maybe you missing the first half will give them the edge they need to win. And if that proves true, then what I predicted here is 100% true, and I therefore know how these things work. If it didn't, then I was wrong.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
that's true. Good point. We'll see. We'll talk about this.
Yes.
Next episode.
I wish you luck. I'm sure by the time this airs, everything will be no. But I hope the game goes well for you, and hope you have a great time later on. And thank you for giving ourselves and our guest your time today, your valuable, precious time away from a football match to come talk about our favorite topic, performance.
Exactly, but you know what? I wanna let him introduce himself with a line that I got from his recent presentation. He presented at SLOConf, and one of his arguments was shift left load testing is a lie.
I saw that, and I wanted to talk about that.
I thought about that too, because we've been promoting shift left load testing and then test earlier, do it continuously in the pipeline. And,
to curse for the first time, I think it said it's bullshit, and he crossed it out and wrote lie.
Yeah.
That's my first time cursing on the podcast. There you go.
Yeah. So, Hassy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Very excited to be here. I love that we're starting with, just going straight to the controversial stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Why not?
So, but maybe you want to quickly introduce yourself, who you are, also why you spoke and what you spoke about at SLOConf, and then why you think your controversial statement is not a lie, it's true.
Sure. So my name is Hassy Veldstra. I'm the founder of Artillery.io. We're a commercial open source company. And what we're doing is we're building a modern testing stack for DevOps and SRE. A bit more controversy. I'll throw that into the mix. We believe that the state of performance and reliability testing in general is kind of stuck in 2015, 2016, and want to change that by building tools which are cloud native, have really strong focus on developer experience, and focus on testing in production, which leads me to SLOConf and my talk there, which was about using production load testing as a guardrail for your SLOs. And it turns out, so before founding Artillery, I was a consultant for many years, consulting for companies like the Trainline and the Zone and Condé Nast, helping them implement DevOps and SRE practices. And as I discovered, which formed the basis for my SLOConf talk, SLOs, service level objectives, and production load testing just happen to go really amazingly well together. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. I really like your talk, and we will link to it. I also like the format of SLOConf because it was like really short. I think like yours was like 8 to 9 minutes to the point. You made a very good point before you had SLOs with, I think, what was the company the main story was Condé
Nast. Condé Nast are an international publisher. They run, I wouldn't know, probably close to 100 publications all around the world. So, magazines like GQ and Vogue and Condé Nast Traveler, huge scale. They serve about 300 million uniques per month, across all those publications. So yeah, that's the experience at Condé Nast is what formed the basis for my talk at SLOConf.
Yeah. So what you said, and I have the slides here open. You said before SLOs, people are paged constantly with symptoms, right? That something was restarted, something is very slow, but there was no clear indication of what was really the problem because there were no SLOs at all. And then you started forcing people to actually use SLOs and first of all think about what are my objectives for my services. Now, here's my question. You said SLOs and performance testing in production go very well in hand. That's great. But people have done load testing before SLOs were a big thing. Brian and I have been doing load testing before this was a big thing. And I believe we've also tested against a certain objective because you ran a test in pre-production and then you report it back. Either nothing works at all, even with only a fraction of the load, or here are our KPIs that we can now validate the system can, kind of handle, or like this is the load, the throughput. Aren't these SLOs as well stuff we had before or not? What do you think?
So I think there's several things there that would be great to actually unbundle and zoom in on. But yes, I agree with you. SLOs are basically KPIs, right? The way I think about SLOs is that the idea is really simple. I mean, it's common sense. If you run something, if you run it in production, you need some kind of a success metric. You need some kind of a way to evaluate whether things are working or not. Mm-hmm. And different teams, throughout the years have basically reinvented that concept in their own way. So I don't think the technical idea of SLOs is that, groundbreaking or interesting or exciting. What's really exciting and what's really powerful is all of the common language and all the common concepts that come packaged with SLOs, all of the rest of the SRE as a discipline. So that's where I think the real power of SLOs comes from, because it gives different teams, different departments as well, this common way of speaking about performance and reliability. It makes it so much easier to do that. And I think it also helps that, it originates in Google. So it comes with a bit of that halo effect, which makes implementing SLOs so much easier because, if Google are doing it, then it's probably a good idea. I imagine most people that have been in the industry will probably agree. Most of the challenges when it comes to building and running systems at scale are actually not technical. They're personal and sociological issues almost. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where SLOs are really powerful because they give a way of implementing change in organizations in a much quicker and more streamlined way than trying to invent something that's unique to a specific organization.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we talk about SLOs too, based on a lot of the conversations Andy and I have had on this podcast, it sounds there's sort of two types of SLOs. Google seems to be a little bit more focused on the SLO as a measure of the end user. It's from the perspective of the end user. And that consumer could be a human being, it could be another service and all, but it's things like uptime availability, error rates, but something that you're going to feel whether or not, who cares? An SLO from that point of view of 90% CPU utilization or something like that would be meaningless because what we're really focusing on is the page is performant and it's being available. Others, though, have taken the SLO side of the house and pulled it a little bit away from the end user and started putting some things like, we know that if our systems are operating within this range, things are good. So they've abstracted it down a layer. When you talk about using SLOs in production for performance, is it a combination, or like where in that spectrum, if on that spectrum, do you see those SLOs?
Yeah, so I would classify myself as someone who's bought into the Google way of doing things, wholesale. So very, very firmly in the first camp. And I think I spoke about that as well in my SLOConf talk. Mm-hmm. So when we kicked off that SRE team at Condé Nast, one of the first and the biggest projects and the biggest challenges that we had to solve was pager fatigue. So people were getting paged for things that didn't really matter in the end. And we wanted to tie that to user experience. So all of the SLOs that we defined were then tied back to a real user experience. And that's what formed the basis for our new alerting and page duty setup. And that's also what we then use to drive our production load testing. So very much in that first camp.
Because Andy, I do think that's an an improvement definitely over, if you think about it, as you were mentioning, our old SLOs from back when we were doing the testing of throughput, capacity, and numbers like that, where it's shifting it to user focus. It's not that it's a complete departure from where we were looking at, but it's extending that to its natural endpoint, which, I got to say up front, I think that's a very good improvement. I think focusing on that end user is a fantastic idea for sure.
Yeah. But Hassy,
I'd say it probably depends. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'd say it probably depends on the kind of system that you're testing as well. So
True.
let's say, it's, I can imagine a situation where maybe you're you're a web server vendor, right? So that's your product. So in that case, you wouldn't have you wouldn't have SLOs that are tied directly to user experience. The consumers of the service would be other systems. So then your SLOs become, they move along that continuum into, the second count that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And this was just what I wanted to ask. So when you're doing load testing in production, are you still then, even though it is for a large publishing company where clearly the end user SLOs are the most important things, are you still adding some of your SLOs in terms of, let's say, how much capacity do you need for a certain user load? Because in the end, yes, we all have quote unquote infinite resources available in terms of compute and storage. But on the other side, everything comes with a cost, right? That means, do you keep track of some of the SLOs at least, where you say, hey, with 1,000 concurrent users, we used to need, 2 Kubernetes nodes with these specs, but now we need 3 with these specs. So in your world, do you see that SLOs are also kind of extended towards more, let's say, these efficiency metrics? Let's call it efficiency from a resource perspective. Do you add them as well?
Yeah, so we definitely track those metrics because they are important. One of the motivations for production load testing is to help you plan for capacity that you might need, right? In future, given a certain load profile. But in that specific case, at least, we didn't define them as SLOs. So our SLOs were only based on real user experience. And then the way we used those SLOs was, twofold. It's actually quite interesting when you think about it. Once we defined those SLOs, our production load tests were both, let's say, bounded or constrained by those SLOs because we couldn't afford for production load tests to affect those SLOs negatively because we're testing in production. So the SLOs were a guardrail for production load tests, but then production load tests were a guardrail in a kind of wider sense for the SLOs because we used them to build up that margin of safety that I talked about. So, the goal was to get to a point where at any point in time, we could add, 20% of extra traffic in production whilst all of our SLOs, stayed green and nothing was negatively affecting real users. So it's an interesting, almost like, yin yang type of thing where the thing loops into itself.
Yeah. And so I think, and this is now the great way of explaining really what I think you mean with this and what the benefit is, because we're talking about you have SLOs for your production system where you have real user load. But then you basically say, we have a certain, buffer, right? That means let's figure out if we, let's say next month, we have a super cool new product online or like with the publisher, a super cool story, and we have 50% more traffic. Can we withstand that traffic and still be within our SLOs? And this is exactly where your production load testing comes in so beautifully, because you can say, yes, we can, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that, one of the reasons that we wanted to put production load testing in place was exactly that scenario. So we would get massive traffic spikes regularly, but not on schedule, because as a publisher, things go viral all the time, but there's no way to predict which one of the pieces of content will go viral and then exactly how viral it will go. So we did have a number of mini incidents where parts of the system would be partially knocked out by something all of a sudden going viral in China, for example. So that's why that focus on that extra buffer of safety was really, really important. SLOs are perfect for keeping that within that safety box, essentially. And what you end up with is almost like you end up with a feedback loop, similar to something like autoscaling controller, kind of. You can think of it in that way. Because you don't want to start with production load testing at scale immediately, right? If you want to do things safely, and you really want to do them safely in production, you start really, really slowly, and you build up that extra load very, very gradually. And that's where having existing SLOs defined really helps you, because if anything goes wrong, that gets reflected immediately, so you can back off and then, go and try to find that bottleneck that caused something to go red, fix it, and then repeat again and try again.
Yeah. Hey, in your talk, you also mentioned that once I think people developers especially learned about what you're doing, more and more developers were asking for, hey, can we do some load testing in production? And your first response was, well, do you have an SLO defined? Right?
Yeah. So that's something we kind of stumbled upon. So, in my experience, at least, developers in general love load testing. It's exciting, right? You really get the chance to push something to its limits. And I think developers get excited about that because things tend to break when they're stressed. So that means it's always a learning opportunity, and it's always an opportunity to improve something. Production load testing, takes that to the next level. It's really, really exciting. It's also partially exciting because it's dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. So we discovered that was a great way to get people, excited about SLOs, because people get excited about production load testing. And then, as you said, if a team had a service that they wanted to include in that production load testing path or setup, they had to have SLOs, because otherwise we couldn't load test their thing safely. And that made that sell so much easier.
One other question, because I took some notes when I listened to your presentation, which, by the way, as I mentioned before, we will link to it. So if you listen to this somewhere in the description of the podcast, you'll find hopefully a lot of useful links. You talked about the importance of fitness functions, right? You explicitly pointed out that term, and I think we covered it already a little bit, but can you I like that term of a fitness function. Can you explain that just for people that may have never heard about it and what benefits that brings?
Yeah, so it's actually one of my favorite concepts, and I have to credit the book, which I think I linked in my presentation, called Evolutionary Architecture, which is where I learned that concept. And it's exactly what it sounds like. Just like in evolution, we have things that evolve a certain way because they're exposed to certain stressors, let's say, in the environment. We can apply the same concept to software systems, and software systems in the wild naturally evolve in response to some pre-existing fitness functions, which just happen to be part of the environment that they evolve in. A classic example might be something like Conway's law, where software architecture ends up resembling the organizational architecture. Mm-hmm. And once we realize that that's what happens in software, just like it happens in nature, we can then almost use that as a hack and define our own fitness functions, which we know will lead to, a certain evolutionary path being taken in the evolution of our software. So production load testing is one of those fitness functions. And, in practical hands-on terms, what that means is that if we're team SRE and we announce to development teams that we're planning to run production load tests, all of a sudden, there is a shift in thinking. And any development team that buys into that, of course, not every development team, might be happy with that. But any developer that buys into the idea, all of a sudden they start thinking about the code they write slightly differently. All of a sudden, things like logging and monitoring become so much more important because things might break in production, and you'll need to debug that. And loads of good stuff happens if you define a good fitness function. And production load testing, I think, is one of the best fitness functions. Maybe I'm biased, that an SRE team could try to implement in an organization, because it will help push through a whole lot of good things that might be difficult to kind of convey the value of otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I like what you said, that basically you have, with these fitness functions, you have the power with some certain pressure on a certain part of the organization or software, that you have the ability to shape what's coming out of it. Right? And I think that's a nice thing.
It's quite similar to what you see with chaos engineering. There's a school of thought even that production load testing can be seen as a type of chaos engineering. And chaos engineering fulfills that same function. If you know, again, as a developer, for example, that, if I deploy my services to Kubernetes, let's say, for example, and if I know that a number of those pods could be killed at any time with no warning, I will start writing my code slightly differently to account for that. Reliability then becomes, one of the concerns that I actively think about day to day, which then helps the overall reliability of the system.
Yeah, Andy and I have had quite a few discussions with chaos, and it definitely seems to be an outgrowth of performance testing, a mutation of it, if you will, if that's a good way to talk about it. But I think we both found it very fascinating because of its roots in theoretical practice. But that brings me to, speaking about your talk, I wanted to give you kudos for mentioning turtles all the way down, because I love it when people mention that one, because that's I just think that's a fantastic story. But going back to this idea of any test, load testing that's not in production is a lie, right? And I know it came with some caveats there. So you have your unit testing, your dev testing, and you also mentioned complex systems. But I was trying to think about situations in which maybe that wouldn't be true, because I'm not being defensive on the idea. I always love these. I love exploring these ideas. And I was trying to think about, okay, what if we're doing like full-on blue-green deployment, or we're one of the rare companies that deploys everything in every environment the same. So you have a full-featured, full-scale. I think Austria just scored a goal because Andy's freaking out. I wish people could see what's going on here. He just got really excited. I thought I was saying something that really excited Andy.
Of course. No, your information was amazingly special for me this moment. But...
Oh, yes. Let's say you are one of these semi-unicorns or rare breeds that have a full production environment in every, in test, not in dev necessarily, but test and UAT and all that, or it's a blue-green type of thing. What I was trying to think of, okay, what would be the difference there? And to me, the difference there, even if you have the same scale, even if you have the same setup, the big difference is when you're running your test in production, your base load is non-synthetic traffic, meaning anytime we write load tests, they're fake. That's the part that I would call BS, right? Because we cannot write what real customers do. And if you take a look at your users, they're all doing different things. There's no, 90% of our customers click here, click here, click. I mean, there's always variation. So you can never recreate exactly what that is. So to me, then, I think the biggest piece is that in production, you have the real crazy, wild things real people do. You're adding those, let's say, fake users on top of that to fill in the gap. But your base is so 100% accurate that that's going to be as close as you can get to a true picture. Whereas even if you're doing that in a green environment, which is exactly the same, you don't have that real user chaos in there to begin with. Is that part of your angle, or what's the angle that really makes you so strong feel so strong about this, or is it multiple things?
It's multiple things, but that is definitely the angle. I don't even really have anything to add to what you just said. That's exactly it. You need real traffic as part of your test setup. One of the reasons I think that load testing is, if you compare it to other kinds of testing, it's quite a niche activity almost. And part of it is because it's really, really difficult to write load tests which are representative of real traffic. It's extremely difficult. It's very time consuming, and people still try doing that, and they try running those tests in a non-production environment. So one of the arguments is, why are you doing that? Why not just go to, the real thing and do it there? So that's one of the aspects of it. The other one is, I'm really glad that you used the word unicorn for, a company that might have a staging environment, which is exactly like production. Just like a unicorn, I'll believe that when I see it. I've yet to see it myself. It's just, and just even trying to think about a situation or a scenario in which that would be possible. I can only come up with extremely kind of limited and small scale almost deployments where you could do something like that. Mm-hmm. And anything non-trivial, I personally don't think is even possible.
I mean, in theory, with a 12-factor app and all, you should be able to, right? But again, that's the point: is who's actually doing that, and if you're,
yeah. So, what I would say here is that I think that load testing is fundamentally different from other kinds of testing. It's fundamentally different from unit testing, from end-to-end testing, from integration testing, and it's different in that. Something like a unit test, right, to take an extreme example, is testing logic and nothing else. It's testing the code and it's testing the things that code does. And that's why unit tests are relatively easy to write. And that's why they're very easy to run in completely different environments. I can run a unit test on my laptop. I can run it on as part of a CI/CD pipeline. Someone else can run it on their laptop. They're very isolated, so end up being very reproducible. Yeah. If you think about a load test, we're not actually testing the code and the logic as much as we're testing the environment in which the code runs. Load tests test operational characteristics of a system and not just, part of the code that's in that system, which, makes them fundamentally different, which means that you cannot divorce a load test of a system from everything that makes up that system. And that would be code, that would be infrastructure, that would be all kinds of configuration that makes up that complex system. Maybe to make an analogy, let's say if you're on a team that is designing a new kind of four-wheel drive all-terrain vehicle. So your unit test would be something like my key fits into the ignition. The button that I used to roll down the window can actually be pressed. Your integration test might be something like, if I put the key into ignition and turn it, the engine starts. So then if you extend that analogy to load testing and you say, okay, so how would a typical team that doesn't do load testing in production might load test this thing? Well, someone will get into the car, they'll start the engine, they'll go into first gear, maybe second gear, and they'll drive it down the road for 1 minute. And the road will be, perfect tarmac, absolutely smooth, nothing weird. If you do that, like if we talk about a real world scenario, that sounds ridiculous. Nobody would do that. If you want to really load test or stress test this thing, you would take it into the mountains. You would drive across, swamps and fields and forests. You test it in the actual environment that it will run in, i.e., something that is close to production or is production. But for some reason, we don't like doing that for software systems, which doesn't really make sense.
I like your analogy with the car. So let me challenge you on this. What if you do this load test where somebody drives it, like 5 minutes around every day, and then every time measures how long it took, how much the tires were used afterwards, how much gasoline was used, maybe usage of the individual parts. And if you do this from every day, and you see it's constant, and that's great. But all of a sudden, maybe for one day, you see, hey, we used 20% more fuel, even though we were driving down the same road with the same gear. Something is wrong. So I think this is where the shift lefting comes in. Whether you call it load testing or performance unit testing, that's obviously up to you. But I think this is why we've been also very strong, and we have some very strong opinions why we believe that load testing can be shifted left. Right?
Well, I'll counter you right there, Andy, because I'm on your side. You know that. But what I'll say for the sake of this is that you're collecting some additional stuff, but you're still not hitting the mountain. Now, all this shift left stuff is going to be extremely beneficial because there's a million other things you might catch before you try it out in the mountain. That maybe there's going to be something like if you think about rockets going up. Right, you want to find every possible little fault before you put it on that launch pad and do that production test, so that only something when it's actually lifting off the earth is going to be detected. And the shift left is finding all those other things that could possibly go wrong with as much confidence, so that when you're getting it production, I mean, I personally believe it's just like, do we pick Kubernetes, serverless? Do we pick Service Fabric or whatever? It's what are the goals of the test? What are the goals of the organization, and finding a best balance of what needs to be done for that. The ultimate goal, obviously, would be to be collecting the telemetry at a very minimum, collecting the telemetry in production, but then being able to add those additional tests to bring yourself to the edge of those SLOs, I think is that last mile for absolute completeness. That, okay, we've done everything we can before production. Now that we're in production, let's hammer at that last bit and find everything. Because one of the things, if you think about, maybe you have a Kubernetes system running, but you're still hitting a traditional database. Well, any testing before that real load, especially unit testing, integration testing, and everything, is not going to be stressing. I mean, your database, if you have a traditional database, is a very finite resource. You can't just scale. Like we know in production, I can throw money at the problem. I can put up more pods. I can spin up a new node. I can do whatever. But if you have one of those bottleneck databases or something else like that in the system, unless you're going to pay for another license to have the full-scale database in pre-prod and the real user scenarios, you're not being able to test what happens if we scale up 3 more nodes and 100 more pods, because we can do that, but can the database handle that? And I think that's where those little bits come in. And to your point, Andy, there might be things you can do to test 80% of that, or whatever percentage of what that might be in pre-prod. I think it's just a comment. I think it's an ad, and I know I'm speaking for you, Hassy, or at least I feel like I'm. Well, I want to hear from you because I got my own opinions, but you're our guest. Please, I'll shut up now.
Well, I think, Andy made a great point, and I think it does demonstrate that there is value in shifting some of that performance testing left. But my counter argument to your counter argument would be that what it comes down to is confidence. And the fact that testing in production gives you the ultimate confidence, and not testing in production can give you false confidence, which can be extremely dangerous. So to take it back to our car analogy, you're running this vehicle on your test track, and you're measuring petrol consumption and how much the tires are wearing and all that stuff. And you get to the point where the car is extremely fuel efficient. And then you take it for its first drive out in the mountains or in a swamp, and you drive into a puddle, and a bit of water gets into the exhaust pipe and blows out the engine. And you never tested for that, right? So that's where production load testing really shines. It lets you identify and see how your system deals with unknown unknowns almost.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, I didn't want to say. I mean, I love your idea. Just want to make sure and want to make a case that people should not start thinking about load testing only in production, because I think there's definitely many use cases that at least I can think of that where it makes sense to do some level of performance testing before. But I have one question to you then, because it still means you need to write performance scripts. You still need to figure out what type of load are you simulating. So now here's my question to you: why go through the effort in writing test scripts that simulate 20% on top of your production load, and not just, mirroring the traffic or duplicating traffic? You should say, hey, I'm taking certain user traffic and then I'm duplicating it to another environment or something like that. Is that something that you've thought of, or is this just very hard because duplicating traffic is just as hard as, or probably even harder because then you have duplicated entries in the database, or I don't know?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so there are 3 main ways to do load testing in production, or 3 types of load testing in production. One is traffic replay, the thing that you're talking about. The other one is dark traffic or dark launches. When you launch a system and it's in production, it's being hit by traffic, but it's not actually visible to end users. So Facebook have, I think, a white paper where they talk about testing their messenger service when it first launched in that way. And then the third one is creating synthetic traffic. So traffic replay is brilliant and it can work really well, but it only works for a certain type of systems. So it can only work well for a system where your requests are, they have to satisfy 2 properties. They have to be idempotent and have to be commutative. So idempotent means that the same request can be replayed, any number of times and get you the same result. They have to be commutative, meaning that, the order of requests doesn't really make a difference. And if we think, what sort of, let's say, websites that translates into, it will be very content-heavy websites. So like, newspapers, magazines, which don't offer personalization. Websites that maybe have classifieds ads, again, no personalizations. And yeah, really not much else.
Yeah.
that I can think of at the moment.
Should we then advocate, like we advocate for 12 fact reps? Should we advocate for load testable APIs or load testable systems? Meaning, in the like design for load testing?
Yes, 100%. That's a great shout. We do need to. We have to if we want to do production load testing, especially. And the idea is not as strange as it might sound at first, because as developers, we already instrument our code for other operational properties like monitoring, like observability, logging, security. So why not do the same for to make load testing easier? And in practice, what that usually means is that you put in a way to know up certain operations in your code. So a classic example would be something like a checkout flow, where you add in a way to not actually charge a card. So that way you can, load test almost that entire flow without actually triggering a change, in the real world. And that's Just Eat, for example. I saw a talk from one of their engineers a couple of years ago. They do load testing in production all the time, at peak as well, which is really impressive. And that's one of the things that they talked about. There is a way in which their load testing code can basically go through the full checkout process, but by toggling certain flags, they know not to try to charge a card.
Yeah, it's like feature toggling, but used for production load testing.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
And I guess a similar thing would have to be done for, let's say, users. If you have a subscription-based service and you would have to have users in production to use in your test, like that you log in and authenticate with, from a business point of view, you can't have those counted as your user base or when you're reporting to your investors on how big we are. So there would have to be a way designed into the system to be able to easily count those people or identify those accounts and not include them in the business reporting, which means more people have to be thinking about this ahead of time and plan for, it's not going to be like, hey, Andy, go test this in production, and you're just going to go hog wild, because then that's just going to throw off a lot of different things, regulatory, as so there's got to be an organizational plan, it sounds like. Is that easy? Is that easy to get people into doing? Like, when you talk to people about this idea, who is it that they're going to rally to their side to say, we want to test this and we need you to change the system a bit so that we can do this? Who is that, and how do you get that to happen?
Yeah. So as a rule, production load testing is it's a team sport, but it does end up involving almost every department in the company. In terms of how long that might take and what the conversations look like will depend on, the culture, I suppose, and, the organization in question specifically. But in my experience, it takes time, but in general, people are very, very receptive, because I think, especially, again, in my experience, there tends to be intuitive understanding for why performance and reliability are important for, any system that has real users, paying users. People in general understand that outages and downtime and slowdowns are bad. So that makes production load testing a fairly straightforward proposition, because of that ultimate confidence factor that it gives you, that things will stay up and it will stay working if there's a traffic spike. So yeah, those conversations are just conversations that need to be had. So with folks in marketing, folks in sales, customer support often needs to be involved, but there's usually not very much pushback. You might need to, so in your production load testing roadmap, say, that you need to come up with as an SRE team that wants to implement that practice, you need to put aside some time to have all those conversations and to get that buy-in. But in my experience, it's just a matter of having those conversations, and it's never really a blocker.
Yeah.
Hey, Thank you so much for all the insights and for the good, fun conversation on also the kind of that we have not opposite views. I think we also put the same cause, but it's also always good to have arguments from either side. I want to quickly give you the chance to talk a little bit about artillery, because I think it's a cool project. We also have a captain integration, I think, lined up or already implemented, which is which is another case for shifting left, because captain is triggering a performance test and then evaluating your quality gates. But do you, for those people that have never heard about artillery, just highlight why to look at artillery? Why should I use artillery and not JMeter?
Yeah, so artillery is cloud native. It runs in your own AWS account. You can scale up your tests really easily. You can run tests at hundreds of thousands of requests per second, millions of virtual users from many different geographical regions, and you can do it as easily as running a test on your laptop. That transition is absolutely seamless. It's very easy to use. We have a very strong batteries included philosophy. So out of the box, you can test a variety of different systems, not just HTTP. You can do socket.io, WebSockets. There are plugins to basically test anything else you can think of. We integrate with monitoring and observability systems out of the box. And it's also designed to be very easy to extend. So if you needed to do something that it doesn't do, usually you just grab a NPM package, write a bit of code, and off you go. It's designed to be very hackable. So that's it in a gist.
Mm-hmm. So that means
it just works. Yeah, it's designed to just work. As a developer, if you can run a test from your machine, you change literally a couple of things, and boom, all of a sudden it runs at massive scale from your own AWS account.
Yeah. And I see, I can encourage everyone, artillery.io, some good documentation. I'm just looking at the test script reference for scripters that want to see how it feels, some great examples. And thanks for giving the performance community another great tool to make their life easier. I think that's what it's really all about in the end.
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed our conversation. It was really fun.
Yeah.
And good luck to Austria in the second half.
Let me just double check. It's still 1-0. We are 45 plus 3, so it's the end. And the key SLO here is obviously the final result, which is 1-0. But I can look at some of the other stats. They had, in the first half, 11 shots and Ukraine only 1. 3 shots on target, Ukraine only 1. Ball possession is almost the same. The Ukrainians are better in pass accuracy. But we'll see. But overall, it seems the Austrians are shooting more. They also had 8 corner kicks versus 1. So I'm confident for the second half.
So basically, this would be if the Austrians were playing a scrimmage match against their own team and were not using the Ukrainian goalie. That would be the difference between prod and non-prod. But now that they're going against the Ukrainian goalie, that's the big difference there. And one last thing on this idea, I think where at least I feel like we netted out here was that it's not that shift left is invalid or anything else. It just seems like I would almost modify what you're saying to say, you're not doing complete and full and accurate, 100% or as accurate as you can get load testing until you take that last step into production. Everything else is valid. Everything else is helping to remove, to add stability to the system. But if you really want that last mile and that solidity, that's where you take it to production. And then you're going to be probably as bulletproof as you can. Obviously, we can never be completely bulletproof. There's no way once we start simulating traffic or even unpredictable events, right? The funny thing is when I used to work, I used to run the performance team at WebMD, and I think it was, I forget, it was in the earlier 2000s. But the idea was like, well, what if someone from the government puts out some, I think there might have been like some bird flu and some swine, way pre-COVID, right? But like, what if something like that, something emergency thing got put out? Can our systems handle that? And looking back the last year, I crack up because granted, now WebMD has a lot more competition, but back then WebMD it was WebMD and basically CDC at that time. There was maybe one other competitor. But that's the kind of thing where you can't predict is going to happen, which is why it's just so boring. Anyway, I'm rambling and I'll stop. I want to let Andy get back to his game. Thank you so much, Hassy. Anything you want to mention? Anything coming up? As I said, your favorite coffee or Irish whiskey or anything else? I don't know.
I'll just mention that I wrote a really long article, Everything I Know About Production Load Testing, which is available on my website, which is veldstra.org. I'll probably be linked in the description of this episode. And no, other than that, shift left, shift right, shift both ways, and use SLOs. They're magical.
And test.
Yeah. And test everything. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Cool. Anything else from you, Andy? Or are you just going to run and grab a pint and
run? Exactly. Yes. Grab a pint and root for the Austrians.
Let's see how long we can drag this out, Hassy. We got anything else? All right. Thank you so much for being on. And to our listeners, thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments, you can tweet us at pure_DT or send us an email at pureperformance@dynatrace.com. As always, if you have any ideas or you want to be on the show, just reach out to us and let us know. And thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.